Akatsu was a F-tier demon who was sent away from Hell to recruit troops to fight angels, since the other demons were addicted to anime recaps. On arriving Earth, he disguised himself as a student and encountered an enemy angel girl in school. But instead of knocking her lights out, he started simping for her and abandoned his mission.
I can't stop myself. I'm getting sucked in.
On Akatsu's first day of school, he showed up looking like a frustrated middle-aged man with a hairline that Saitama would die for. During the introduction, the teacher sobbed and begged the students to make Akatsu feel welcome, because he knew what it meant for one's hairline to abandon them. When he let Akatsu tell the class about himself, the idiot spun a sorrowful tale that had the students crying in a matter of seconds. This seemed to please him, as he had planned to gain their sympathy, and he couldn't believe how dumb his new classmates were. However, the stupid smirk he had on his face was wiped off when their teacher noticed a thread on his head and tried to remove it. To the man's surprise, both the thread and Akatsu's hair came off, revealing that he'd been wearing a wig. Annoyed that Akatsu had been pretending to belong to the Bald Brotherhood when he was actually a full-blown Giga Chad, the teacher prepared to knock his teeth out. Of course, he was about to talk no jutsu another tale and began pulling his hair, but that didn't stop the teacher from knocking some sense into him. After that, the man instructed him to take the empty seat at the back, and just as Akatsu was approaching it, he noticed the girl sitting beside it. Immediately, Akatsu was struck by Cupid's arrow, and after taking his seat, the dumbass idiot imagined a life with her without even knowing her name. As soon as his fantasy ended, he got the brilliant idea to ask her to help him carry out his mission, but didn't know how to speak to her about it. Just then, a boy who thought he was the reincarnation of Shakespeare approached the girl and confessed his feelings. Unfortunately for him, Blondie told him she didn't date virgin losers who reeked of desperation. Not one to accept rejection, the boy started begging until his friend, Tanagawa, approached them and apologized to Goldilocks on his behalf. Tanagawa introduced himself and also introduced the pitiful lover boy as Hirota. Hirota approached them, and the trio walked out of the classroom to get acquainted with each other. Akatsu asked the boys who the blonde baddie was. They told him her name was Lily, and said she transferred to the school a few weeks ago. Hirota also gave him a rundown of Lily's personality, and how she was loved by everyone who got to know her. However, he warned Akatsu to stay away from her, because she was as brutal as she was nice when it came to rejecting someone. He then began recounting all the times Lily had turned him down, and somewhere along the line, he became annoyed. The next moment, he started walking to the classroom to ask Lily out again, but Tanagawa tried to stop him. While that was happening, Akatsu told himself that Lily was indeed the perfect candidate to carry out his mission. Later that day after school, Akatsu walked back home thinking of a way to bring up his proposal to Lily without coming off as a crazy kaku. He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice when Lily exited an alley. Immediately, he apologized before asking why she had come out of the alley, and Lily explained that she was just a girl when it came to navigating the streets. Akatsu accepted her explanation and then tried to introduce himself while giving off the cool jock vibe, but failed miserably. This made Lily laugh, but she didn't make him feel bad about it and extended her hand to shake after properly introducing herself. As they shook hands, Akatsu noticed Lily's jacket was ripped and asked how it had happened. Lily quickly pulled her hand away and changed the topic, saying it was fate that let their paths cross. She then invited him to visit a cafe with her so they could get acquainted properly, and he agreed. On their way, they made small talk, but things took a dark turn when they tried to cross the street. This was because Lily was almost hit by the horseman of Isekai, Truck-kun himself. Immediately, our boy Wonder jumped into action and used his body to protect her from harm. Lily was shocked to see that he'd acted as a disposable meat shield, but was even more shocked when she saw that he now resembled a low-budget Sukuna. However, she didn't run off screaming bloody murder. Instead, she grabbed his arm and ran when the people started approaching them. At the empty park where they took refuge, Lily apologized to Akatsu for allowing him to risk his life to save her. She also asked what he was, stating that no normal human would have walked away from that crash unhurt. Akatsu internally scolded himself for blowing his cover. However, when he noticed Lily didn't look scared, he felt relieved. This prompted him to come clean, and after being partially transformed again, he admitted he was a demon. He said he'd been sent to Earth to find someone capable of leading Hell's troops to victory against the angels in the ongoing war, and added that he was sure she was the right fit for the job. Lily pointed out that it was too sudden, and he assured her that she could do it, promising that she didn't have to make it a permanent position. Still, Lily hesitated to accept his proposal, stating that there was nothing someone as weak and scrawny as her could do in a war. Akatsu told her not to worry, and just as he was about to convince her that she'd be the best thing to happen to Hell, he was suddenly bound by chains. Confused as to what in the 50 Shades of Grey was happening, Akatsu tried to break free. But then, Lily laughed and said that the rip-off Michael Jackson would be ashamed to know there were demons as dumb as him roaming around. So confused, Akutsu asked who she was, so Lily spared his pea-sized brain from overworking itself by revealing that she was an angel. The look of shock on Akutsu's face made her laugh, and when she saw he kept struggling against her chains, she advised him to give up as they were unbreakable. When he kept trying, Lily told him it was truly fate that brought them together, because he was the second demon she'd encountered that day. Revealing that her jacket had gotten torn during her fight with the first demon she exorcised in the alley he saw her coming out of. Hearing this pissed Akutsu off, and before Lily knew what was happening he hulked out and broke the chains. Immediately he attacked, but Lily snapped out of her shocked state in time to avoid getting hit, and after a few more failed attempts from Akutsu to hit her, she bound him in the chains again. She then summoned her scythe and said if he didn't want to be erased, he should tell her what hell was planning. Even though Akutsu was scared of dying, he said he'd rather suck on a lollipop than betray his kind. So Lily decided to send on his way. However, she changed her mind and told him that from that day forward, he'd be working for her as her assistant. When he tried to refuse, she showed him the picture she took of him tied up and threatened to post it online. She promised that the picture would go viral in a matter of minutes, and he'd become an unforgettable meme. Having no choice, he agreed to be her minion but told himself that it would only be until he could get away from her. However, he soon realized that it would be an impossible task, because Lily suddenly placed a collar around his neck. As if that wasn't bad enough, she informed him that his new job description included hunting demons for her. Akutsu said she had to be high on some premium pot if she believed he would help her hunt his kind. He then tried to take off his collar, but she told him not to stress himself out with such a tedious task, because she was the only one who could remove the collar. She explained that the collar was created to suppress a demon's powers and could be used as a tracking beacon should he try to go a wall. She also informed him that the collar allowed her to do anything she wanted to him, and proved it by moving his limbs like a puppeteer. The icing on the cake was that she also controlled his speech, and before he knew it, he was doing stuff he would never have done if he were in control of his body. For one, he spoke to Lily with respect and even ran to get her a drink, which she poured on him, because he'd warmed it with his body. Next, he went full Bob the Builder and made a throne with materials from God knows where. As Lily sat on the throne feeling like the reincarnation of Queen Elizabeth, she asked Akutsu what he wanted her to do for him as she was feeling a little generous. Surprisingly, he got on all fours and turned his peaches to her, begging that she punish him for being a naughty boy. Now, even though he said this, he didn't actually want it, but because he was under the influence of Lily's powers, he kept acting like he wanted some 50 Shades of Grey treatment. Lily found his request amusing as she expected demons to be secretly kinky. However, she wasn't like that, so she hesitated. The next moment, a security guard showed up, and as he ran towards them, screaming that the park was no place for exhibitionist freaks, Lily ran for the hills. Akutsu followed her lead, and the two only stopped running when they were sure they had given the man the slip. Once they were no longer panting or gasping for air, Lily asked Akutsu if he was ready to work for her. Of course, he told her no and even insisted that she exorcise him. But Lily refused and threatened to make him walk around with his micro-sausage, swinging from side to side. Knowing that Lily would keep to her word, Akutsu proposed a deal he was sure would keep his hands clean. He told her that he was willing to alert her to the presence of his fellow demons, but wouldn't help her hurt them. Lily accepted his proposal but swore that if he led her astray, she would end his miserable life. With the terms and conditions of their partnership concluded, Lily promised to hug him each time he did her bidding.
Are you serious?
She also offered to give him one right there, which not only surprised Akutsu, but made him wonder if was as bipolar as your girlfriend. However, he soon realized she was messing with him, and just as he began complaining about it, the security guard showed up and they ran away again. Later, when Akutsu returned home, he realized that his collar was gone and in its place was a tattoo, making him wonder what happened. Just then, he received a text message from Lily, informing him that the collar was now part of his body. This made him realize that the tattoos were permanent, and he became annoyed because now he'd never get to have a beach or pool episode. Feeling defeated, he told himself he needed to get rid of the annoying angel before things got out of hand. Almost at the same time, Lily updated her supervisor on her demon-slaying, demon exorcising adventures. However, she chose to leave out the part where she made a deal with Akutsu, as she intended for him to become her ticket to winning back Heaven's favor. Back in Akutsu's place, he recalled how he'd been assigned his mission by his supervisor Liz. Liz had told him the mission was important for Hell's survival, and told him to do a good job. She also showed him pictures the angels took and posted online of the demons they captured. Each one was more humiliating than the last, and it broke Akutsu's heart to see how his kin suffered. Liz warned him to be vigilant as they had intel that the angels had sent their agents to Earth, and she was sure they would be formidable for him. However, she trusted that he had the backing of the plot gods and asked him to rely on them. It was Liz who came up with the dumb plan to gain sympathy from the humans by having Akutsu wear the bald wig. Unfortunately, that plan had failed and now he was stuck being an errand boy to his natural enemy. After that brief recap session, Akutsu began getting ready for bed, but all he could think of was how he was going to take Lily down eventually. Just then, his attention was drawn to the television, and after watching the show that was on for a few seconds, he got an idea. The following day, Akutsu showed up to school looking like he'd stepped out of a shoujo manga. When Tanagawa and Hirota saw him, they were surprised and asked if he had been visited by the fairy godmother the night before. Akutsu assured them that he woke up like that, but before he could say more, Lily arrived. So Captain Stupid decided it was time to put his plan in motion. It so happened that after watching that show, he did some research on how to be a chick magnet, so that Lily would fall for him and he'd stop being her errand boy. However, when he laid eyes on Lily, he was stunned into silence by her cute looks and her innocence. Turns out that she also watched the show and somehow came up with the same idea Akutsu had. Eventually, the two idiots realized that they shared the same brain cells as an orange cat and had come up with the same idea, however, that only fueled their agenda even more. Later during class, Lily acted shy when Akutsu's hand touched hers after she returned his razor. This made Akutsu lose his mind for a few seconds, but he retaliated by patting her head, which evened the playing field. After class, their teacher asked Lily to take some papers to the faculty room, but she approached Akutsu and begged him to help her carry them. She played the role of a weak girl so well that Akutsu almost lost the battle. However, he reversed the situation by playing the part of a strong, caring guy. For the rest of the day, each one tried to raise the other up with their looks and actions, but the outcome was always the same. The final one was when Lily purposely tripped and fell on top of Akutsu, catching him off guard with a puppy dog look that would melt anyone's heart. Lily was so sure she'd won, but her victory was short-lived because the teachers separated them and scolded them for shamelessly flirting during class. In the end, the two silently agreed to call a truce, even though it was only for a short while. A few days later, Lily and Akutsu made plans to meet up and hunt demons, but while she waited for Akutsu to show up, she was approached by two weird guys who thought they were God's gift to women. They asked Lily to hang out with them, but she politely declined, saying she was waiting for someone. Unfortunately, that only encouraged them, and they gushed about how cute she was as they tried to convince her to go with them. Suddenly, Akutsu, who had been standing behind the trio for God knows how long, spoke up. He acted all cool and told the guys to stop bugging Lily as she wasn't into clingy losers with heavy NPC energy. He was still speaking when the annoyed Lily smacked him on the head with a figurine for showing up late. Immediately, the desperate guys ran away, fearing that she would do the same thing to them. A few minutes later, as Lily and Akutsu began walking, Akutsu complained about how his head hurt because of what she did. Lily didn't care and said she hoped the smack had given his brain a full factory reset. Just then, he noticed she dressed up nicely, and when kept staring at her, Lily asked that he stop looking at her like he wanted to expand her domain. Akutsu assured her that he wasn't into plotless, virtually challenged Lolis, and explained that he only thought she looked as cute as she did on the day she tried to make him fall for her. Embarrassed, Lily told him never to speak of that day again and threatened to destroy his social life by having him act all lovey-dovey with their teacher during assembly if he did. Of course, Akutsu believed her and fell to his knees, begging her to show mercy, causing those around to take pictures of his pathetic behavior. Lily seemed pleased with this and told him it was time for them to start hunting. As she began walking away, Akutsu prayed they wouldn't encounter any demons because he didn't want to be a traitor to his people. When he caught up with her, he asked where she wanted to go first, and she pointed at a poster warning people of stray dogs in the area. She explained that there have been reports of stray dogs attacking women, and she could bet all of Goku's food that it was the work of a beast-type demon. Akutsu asked how she intended to find the demon, and she said they would visit all the places the reports were made. She then asked how close a demon had to be for him to sense it, and he said he could sense weaker demons if they were close by. However, he had trouble sensing the likes of the upper moons because they could mask their powers. After hearing this, Lily told him that he was just as useless as Sasuke's baby mama, causing him to complain. Suddenly, he sensed a sinister presence behind him and turned around in a rush, but the presence was already gone. Lily asked if he'd sensed a demon, and he told her no, so she suggested they start visiting the places of the attacks. Akutsu didn't sense any demons in the places they visited, so they decided to take a break and have lunch at a cafe. While Lily stuffed herself with a different kind of meat, Akutsu asked how she could still be hungry when all she did when they were hunting was eat. Lily responded that she needed all the energy she could get for hunting, so he told her that if she kept eating like a pig, the only thing she'd need energy for was the gym. Angered by his subtle way of calling her fat, Lily tried to strangle him but stopped when she felt the same sinister presence Akutsu felt earlier. Speaking of Akutsu, he also sensed the presence, and as they tried to figure out who it was, they saw a crying Hirota banging his head against the glass window. Having no choice, they invited the dim-witted idiot inside to sit with them and explained that Lily was giving Akatsu a tour of the city. Hirota apologized for misreading the situation and admitted that when he spotted them earlier and thought they were on a date, his green-eyed monster clawed its way out. This made Akatsu realize that the presence he'd sensed earlier was Hirota's jealousy, so he asked Hirota why he hadn't just approached them before. Hirota explained that he was with a friend and had only snuck away to say hi to them for a few minutes. Before he could excuse himself to return to his friend, a girl approached their table and began scolding Hirota for leaving her. Hirota apologized and decided to introduce her to Akatsu and Lily, but for some reason the girl was rude to Lily. She called her gnome because of her size, and even though it annoyed Lily, she kept her cool. For Akatsu, the girl treated him like an insignificant background character, which he didn't mind. Lily then asked Hirota who the wannabe Queen of Mean was, and Hirota introduced her as Yuka, his childhood friend. However, Yuka insisted she was his girlfriend, which shocked Hirota as he'd never once considered her as anything but a bro. Lily saw this moment as her chance to get back at Yuka, so she sweetly asked Hirota why he'd confessed to her 5 times when he already had a girlfriend. Immediately, an angry Yuka demanded to know if what Lily said was true and began pulling Hirota out of the cafe by his ear. Akatsu told Lily she didn't have to do what she did, but Lily said Yuka deserved it for being a condescending brat. She then told him that they were done hunting for the day and instructed him to contact her if he sensed any demons. As soon as she walked away, a dark shadow appeared beside Akatsu, but it vanished almost immediately and he didn't see it. The following day, Akatsu woke from a dream where he and Lily had fought and exorcised a demon. The dream had felt so real that Akatsu let out a relieved sigh when he realized it was a bad dream. Later that day at school, Yuka approached Lily and apologized for the way she treated her at the cafe. Lily assured her that she wasn't angry with her, but Akatsu, who was watching their interaction, could tell that the girls were faking their niceness to each other. After Yuka left, Lily complained about the subtle jabs that Yuka threw at her height. During the class break, Akatsu went to the rooftop, and his mind kept returning to the dream he had, making him wonder if his deal with Lily would do him more harm than good. His thoughts were soon interrupted by Tanigawa and Hirota, who asked why he looked like the Lord of Glum and Doom. Akatsu didn't know how to explain that his problem had to do with Lily, so instead he told them that he'd been dreaming a lot about an older lady he knew. Surprised, the boy said he was definitely in love with the lady if she kept appearing in his dreams, but Akatsu denied it. This made them burst into laughter, and after teasing him for having wet dreams about a super hot MILF, Hirota said he'd been so sure Akatsu had the hots for Lily. Akatsu was surprised and asked Hirota if he wouldn't be bothered if he truly had feelings for Lily, and Hirota told him no. He said that all was fair in love and war, but told Akatsu that he couldn't give him dating advice as he'd never been in a relationship. Akatsu then said he'd believed Hirota was a master when it came to relationships because he knew how often he hit on girls even though his rise gain was lower than an E rank. Hirota told him that he'd have bagged a girl ages ago if Yuka hadn't made it her life's work to cockblock him at every turn. This made Akatsu suggest that Hirota date Yuka, but the idea made the boy freeze up. Just then, Akatsu received a text from Lily, informing him that they would go demon hunting later. He texted back saying he couldn't go because he had a stomach ache, so she decided to go alone. 2 hours later, she collapsed on a bench, exhausted from all the searching she'd done. While she was sitting there, Yuka showed up and started making small talk with her before inviting her to spend the rest of the day with her. Lily felt it was a bit suspicious for Yuka to invite her out, but she agreed to spend the day with her since she wanted to avoid trouble with humans. Yuka first took Lily shopping for clothes and laughed at her after she made her try on an outfit that was 2 sizes too big for her small stature. Of course, Lily got revenge when she indirectly called Yuka fat by suggesting she try on an outfit that Big Mom would rock. Yuka tried to brush it off by suggesting they go elsewhere, and after Lily agreed, they went to a bookshop. There another battle of wits ensued with each girl picking and buying a book that the other found insulting to their nature. After they left the store, Yuka took Lily to a photo booth after learning that she'd never been in one before. When the pictures were ready, Yuka taught Lily how to use stickers to make them better. Their last stop was a cafe, and after chatting for a while, both girls admitted to each other that spending the day together hadn't been as bad as they thought it would be. However, Yuka had to leave first because she had a few errands to run, but at least things between them were better. Soon after she left, Lily received Akatsu's text, asking where she was since he was feeling better and wanted to join her. When they met up, he sensed a demon nearby, so she asked him to lead the way. They found the demon under a bridge, and Lily wasted no time in attacking it, while Akatsu hid since he didn't want to be known as a traitor. The demon evaded Lily's attacks, and when she asked if he was the so-called stray dog attacking women, he told her he'd answer her question if she could defeat him. Lily assured him that defeating him would be easy, but he told her not to underestimate him because no one had ever defeated him in his true form. After saying this, he tried to pull a Super Saiyan power-up only to end up looking like he spent his nights dancing on a pole. Irritated by his new look, Lily used her chains to hit his crown jewels, causing him to double over in pain. Akatsu took pity on the poor fool and came out of hiding to help him massage his waist. But while he did that, Lily pointed out that he was supposed to be hiding. This made the demon ask Akatsu if he was working with Lily, and when Akatsu didn't respond immediately, he got his answer. The demon called Akatsu a traitor and refused to listen when he tried to explain that he was no different from a dog on a very long leash. However, he told him that if he wanted him to believe that he hadn't jumped ship and was now siding with the enemy, he had to attack Lily. Of course, Akatsu couldn't do that, and when he told the demon so, Lily instructed him to shut up and be a good donkey. She then approached the demon again, but before they could begin fighting, Akatsu came up with an absurd, completely out-of-pocket suggestion. Like some Zen hippie coach, he told them that the only way to settle their differences was through love. As expected, they ignored him and began fighting each other, but as they did that, they talked about how stupid Akatsu was for making such a suggestion. Akatsu didn't take their hurtful words to heart and told them that he would help them see that he was right. The next moment, this idiot ripped his clothes to reveal that he had on the same embarrassing spandex as the demon and began singing off-key about love. When he was finished, he tossed his mic towards Lily, asking her to give it a shot, making the demon wonder what in the poetry slam rap battle was happening. He was surprised when Lily picked up the mic and began raping and dissing Akatsu. When she finished dropping bars, she returned the mic and Akatsu responded to her diss. This impromptu low-budget rap battle went on until the demon begged Akatsu to stop trying to be like Kendrick, because no matter how hard he tried, he just wasn't like us. He thanked Akatsu for trying to save his life, but said he couldn't stand and watch as he humiliated himself. After a lengthy crying session between the demon and Akatsu, the demon surrenders to Lily, but she asks him to explain why he attacked all those women before she would exorcise him. The demon told her that it all began when he saw a billboard advertising shapewear, and since that day, he became obsessed with finding out if women wore them. In other words, he went after women so he could see what they had underneath their skirts, and that made Lily feel disgusted. She then declared that she would free him from his sins, and as she began exorcising him, the demon thanked Akatsu for being the first person to care for him. As soon as Lily finished her job, Akatsu was surprised to see Lily taking pictures of the puppy that was standing in the place where the demon had been. A few minutes later, a woman came to collect the puppy and thanked Lily for finding it. After she drove off, Akatsu questioned Lily about what he witnessed, and she explained that the puppy was the demon. However, when she said she was exorcising it, she was merely sealing away his wicked thoughts and his powers. She swore she had never taken the life of any demon she hunted and explained that her fight with the demon earlier was all a bluff. Akatsu found this hard to believe and asked about the demon she'd bragged about slaying on the day they met, so she showed him a picture of herself with another puppy she claimed was the demon he was asking about. As she began walking away, Akatsu wondered if everything he'd been taught about angels being cruel was wrong, seeing as Lily was kind-hearted and caring. When he admitted this to Lily, she teased him about it and offered to buy him food, even though she was secretly overwhelmed by the kind things she said about her. A few days later, Akatsu had another dream featuring Lily, and in this one, she almost kissed him. Unfortunately, the kiss never happened because he was yanked out of dreamland by his teacher, who gave him a knock for dozing off during class. After the man walked away, Akatsu tried to understand why he'd been dreaming about Lily lately, and when the thought that he had feelings for her crossed his mind, he quickly pushed them aside. That night, he received a surprise visit from Liz, who claimed she'd informed him via email that she was dropping by to deliver something to him. Akatsu asked what was so important that she had to deliver herself, and she said it was his new uniform. However, she only had the female one that she was wearing and promised to ship the male one to him soon. This made Akatsu say she purchased the female uniform so she could reenact her favorite R-rated movie while wearing it. Liz ignored his rude remark about her cultured desires and asked how his mission was going. Akatsu admitted things weren't going smoothly because the candidate he had in mind was a rather peculiar nutjob. Liz accepted his explanation and promised to do her best to support him in any way because time was running out. She then informed him that she was spending the night at his place as she was dead broke and couldn't afford a hotel room. Akatsu tried to protest, but she shushed him and disappeared into the bathroom to change clothes, leaving his dirty mind to wander. When she emerged from the bathroom in her nightgown, Akatsu told himself that he was finally graduating from boyhood to manhood. Unfortunately, all hopes of pie creaming that night were dashed when Liz pulled out her sleeping bag and wrapped herself in it. The following day, Liz told Akatsu they were going out to do some special training, but didn't tell him what the training was about. It wasn't until she made him approach and speak to several girls that he realized she was training him to unlock that ultimate ruse that your favorite blue-eyed sensei seemed to have been born with. As luck would have it, one of his test subjects happened to be Yuka, and when he approached her, she immediately deduced what he was trying to do and teased him for it. Akatsu tried to deny it, but she didn't believe him and said only losers like him would think of picking up girls in a dungeon, on the street. She then told him she would agree to a pity date as long as he paid for everything, and Akatsu agreed to go. At the bar Yuka chose, she asked Akatsu if he had a crush on Lily, causing him to squirt juice out of his ears and not his nose like a normal person. When he recovered, he did not having feelings for Lily, but Yuka didn't believe him and pointed out that he and Lily were like two peas in a pod. This statement made Liz, who was listening to the conversation through Akatsu's earpiece, ask who Lily was. Akatsu ignored her and tried to stir the conversation away from his feelings by asking Yuka what her feelings for Hirota were like. Yuka admitted that she liked Hirota, but the idiot was too dense and stupid to know this, and it wasn't always that childhood friends become lovers. Akatsu advised her not to give up and Yuka thanked him for his advice, saying that she would pull out all the stops to get what she wanted. When their conversation died down, Liz suggested that Akatsu invite Yuka for a stroll, but he refused, stating that it was too late for a stroll. Liz told him that if he didn't do as she asked, she would give him a bad score on his evaluation, so he was forced to extend that invitation. Some time later, Yuka bid Akatsu goodnight and promised to keep what happened at the bar a secret, which he was grateful for. Liz revealed herself as soon as Yuka left, and she told Akatsu that she was proud of how far he'd come. However, she expressed her concern for the way he almost gave the bartender the Hawk-Tua special before leaving the bar with Yuka. She said she wasn't the type to judge people for their preferences. However, she felt he shouldn't have done that in front of the woman he was trying to impress. Akatsu felt ashamed, but he didn't know how to explain to Liz that he'd acted that way because of his stupid tattoo, which Lili had accidentally activated earlier. As Akatsu walked home, he told himself that after the date he was feeling more confident in his rizzing abilities, and it was time to use them on Lili. Surprisingly, Lily also decided to put more effort into making Akatsu fall for her. However, a few hours into the day, she began questioning her ability to make guys fall at her feet like dominoes. This was because Akatsu didn't react to her, and when she tried to force a reaction by threatening to activate his collar, he scoffed at her. Annoyed that the worthless demon scum had the upper hand, she decided to change tactics and go on the offense. Unfortunately, everything she did backfired. So, as a last resort, she attempted to crash into him on the stairs. Akatsu anticipated this, so instead of getting a face full of rice cakes like Lily hoped, he caught her mid-air and using his best Playboy impression asked if she had hurt herself. Embarrassed, Lily tried to leave, but Akatsu was in a full rizzing mood, so he stopped her, saying he needed to take her to the nurse's office to ensure that she wasn't hurt. A little while later, Lily rejoined Akatsu outside the nurse's office, and after reassuring him that she was fine, she sat beside him. Akatsu then chose that moment to drink some water, and for some reason, Lily found it hard to look away from him. When he noticed her stare, he asked if she wanted water and offered to go get her another bottle, but she refused. To his surprise, she picked up his bottle like she was going to drink from it, but instead of doing that, she looked him dead in the eye and said drinking from the same bottle as him could be considered an indirect kiss. This made Akatsu blush, but even though he tried to hide it by looking away, Lily noticed and felt proud of herself. However, she'd underestimated Akatsu's ability to recover quickly from her teasing, and he caught her off guard by shyly asking her not to say things that got him excited. Lily apologized and started feeling bad until she noticed Akatsu smirking and realized he toyed with her. Annoyed, she decided to get back at him, so she tossed the bottle in the air and used her chains to cut it in half, causing the water to pour all over her body. After that, she struck a provocative pose, hoping to get a reaction, but all she got was a jacket covering her up instead. Feeling sad that her charms hadn't worked on Akatsu, Lila returned to class and laid her head on the table. Yuka found her like that and asked what the problem was, so Lila responded by asking if she knew how to capture a guy's heart. Yuka said that she did, and did a quick search on her phone before showing it to Lily. After school, Akatsu followed Lily as usual since it was their thing to hunt demons after school. However, this time, Lily told him they weren't going hunting. She said she wanted to reward him for all the effort he'd put into their hunts and invited him to her place to collect the reward. Akatsu was sure the sneaky angel was plotting something, but against his better judgment, he agreed to go to her place. When they arrived at her building, Akatsu was surprised to see it was more modern and better than the shoebox he was living in, making him realize that angels were loaded. After they went inside, Lily switched to waifu mode and when Akatsu saw her in her apron and glasses, the stupid degenerate horn dog immediately assumed the apron was the only thing she had on. Lily told him to get rid of his cultured fantasy and turned around so he could see that she had a dress on. Sometime later, she served him a plate of spaghetti, which he suspected had a heavy dose of poison, but when he ate it, he was surprised that it tasted finger-licking good. Lily boasted that she'd gotten cooking lessons from the best chef in the East Blue, so of course her meals were top-notch. While they ate, Akatsu told Lily that his favorite thing to eat was bell peppers, causing her to laugh at the fact that he considered it food. After they ate, Lily proposed they watch a movie, and insisted it be a romantic one because the one Akatsu picked out had a lot of bugs in it. As they watched it, Akatsu found himself drawn to the intense look Lily wore as she stared at the television. Things only intensified when a kissing scene came up, and he found himself staring longingly at her lips until Lily broke the spell by saying she was going to get them drunk. As soon as she stood up, she hit her knee on the table but acted like she was fine and kept walking. Akatsu noticed this and tried to stop her by pulling her back, but this led to a little struggle until they both fell to the floor. Akatsu apologized, but when he attempted to look away, he realized that Lily looked every bit the charming vixen he'd seen in his countless wet dreams. At that moment, he stopped thinking with his brain and allowed his little captain to take over the cockpit. So he didn't realize that he was leaning in to kiss her until Lily's alarm went off, bringing him back to his senses. Immediately, the two jumped in surprise, and after Lily turned off the alarm, the reality of what almost happened hit her like a freight train. Her brain began to overheat, and when she didn't say anything, Akatsu told her he was going home. Shortly after he left, she got on a call with her supervisor and delivered her daily reports about her mission. However, when she finished, she couldn't help but think about the almost kiss and how it made her feel not knowing that Akatsu was also doing the same thing as he walked home. Believe it or not, these two idiots arrived at the same conclusion, which was that they had somehow fallen for each other during their extended cat and mouse game. This realization made it hard for Lily to fall asleep that night, and as a result, she was nodding off during class the next day. While she slept, she dreamed she was in a dating simulation game with Akatsu, and every decision she made affected his behavior and appearance. Unknown to her, in the real world, Akatsu noticed she'd fallen asleep and tried to see if she looked angelic while she slept. Short answer, she didn't, and with the way her eyes rolled to the back of her head, he was certain she would make a great addition to the cast of The Pope's Exorcist. Back in Dreamland, Lily sat on a bench and had a mini freakout session when the fake Akatsu appeared before her as a floating upper body. Eventually, she pieced him back together, unlike Humpty Dumpty, and as he sat next to her on the bench, she tried to act like she wasn't affected by his presence. That didn't work because the fake Akatsu placed his hand on her face and admitted that he was more in love with her than Romeo was with Juliet. He then asked her to close her eyes, which made her freak out, but eventually, she calmed down and decided to select the option that asked her to close her eyes, secretly hoping it would lead to a kiss. Before she could do that, the fake Akatsu was slashed by a samurai who suddenly appeared. As he lay on the ground dying, he told Lily not to cry and asked that she give him her $1,000,000 smile, so she did. As soon as he saw this, he coughed up blood and died, causing Lily to let out a pained scream, and the next moment, she awoke in the real world to the real Akatsu and Yuka standing over her. It seemed Akatsu had been the one to shake her awake, and when he asked if she'd been having a bad dream, she gave him a weird look because she truly believed he'd died. Later, Lily awoke in the nurse's office after having gone there because she was a bit overwhelmed by everything that happened. She was in the process of gathering her thoughts when she heard Akatsu walk in and call her name, so she quickly covered herself up, pretending to still be asleep. She thought he'd come to tease her like he always did, but when images of him holding her in a passionate embrace crossed her mind, she sat up. To her surprise, the nitwit was in the process of undoing his top buttons and removing his tie, which made her assume he'd been planning to assault her in her sleep, so she returned under the blanket. Eventually, she decided to stop acting like a scared little girl and teach him a lesson. So before he could react, she strung him up like a piece of meat. Akatsu asked what he'd done wrong, and she accused him of trying to slip inside her sweet cheeks while she slept, which surprised him. However, he explained that he'd come to speak with her about his tattoos, so she set him free and followed him to class. There, he asked her to get rid of the tattoos so he could visit the pool, but Lily refused and asked why he felt the need to go swimming when his mission was going south. Akatsu explained that it was because this was the only chance he'd get to enjoy his life. He told her that in hell he'd lived a miserable life, but after coming to Earth, he decided he was going to stop living like a shut-in neat, realizing he'd shared too much. He apologized to Lily for boring her with his story. To his surprise, she sympathized with him and instructed him to sit so she could hide his tattoos. When she began the removal process, a blonde girl suddenly materialized from her chains and attacked them. Lily moved out of the way to save herself before calling out to Akatsu to do the same. so he activated his ultra instincts and moved before the girl swung her weapon. He then asked Lily who the girl was, and she explained that she was her avatar, which she created as an anti-demon weapon and had placed in his neck as a precaution to ensure he didn't betray her. Akatsu was shocked by her admission, but he didn't have enough time to scold her as the avatar tried to attack Lily. Thankfully, she dodged the attack and continued dodging the ones that followed. However, she couldn't understand why she was being attacked when she was the avatar's master. When Akatsu voiced what she'd been thinking, she told him it was probably malfunctioning because it had spent so much time inside him. The next moment, their teacher opened the door and began complaining about them still being in school and turning the class into a marketplace. The man soon shut up when he saw the weapon-wielding avatar, who turned her attention to him and tried to chop his head off. Immediately, Akatsu tackled the man to the floor, allowing Lily to bind the avatar with her chains. She then instructed Akatsu to take the man somewhere safe, but he didn't swing into action like she'd hoped. Instead, he turned his attention to their teacher, who before he dramatically passed out begged Akatsu to get the other students in the building to safety. Tired of waiting for him to react, Lily dragged the teacher away with her chains and then told Akatsu to jump into the courtyard with her. The avatar also jumped into the courtyard, so Lily created a barrier to prevent anyone from interfering with the battle. The next moment, the avatar targeted Akatsu, but Lily helped him by retraining it with her chains. However, it broke free and turned its attention to her, but she dodged its attack, and while doing so, she wondered why it was so strong. She soon got her answer when she noticed a tattoo on the avatar's back, causing her to fall in shock. Akatsu tried to disarm the avatar, but the avatar sent him flying with a powerful kick. It then resumed going after Lily, who still hadn't moved a muscle, and still didn't do so when the avatar closed in on her. Trusting in the plot gods, Akatsu swooped in again and played the role of Superman by pushing back the avatar's blade with his bare hands. This seemed to shake Lily because she was standing next to him the next second, asking if he was okay. Akatsu told her wasn't and said it was time for her to pull herself together. This was enough to put the fight back into her, so she devised a plan which she asked Akatsu to help her execute. As part of the plan, Akatsu acted as bait and drew the avatar's attention to himself, giving Lily an opening to sneak up behind it and deactivate it. As soon as she touched the tattoo on the avatar's back, snacks emerged, but Lily wasn't fazed. She focused on the task, and after she managed to pull out the snakes, the avatar vanished. She then apologized to Akatsu, admitting that his powers were still bound, which was why he couldn't fight at full strength. Akatsu asked if she'd returned the avatar to his body, and she said she'd returned it to her own body, so he had nothing to worry about. Suddenly, she passed out from exhaustion, and the barrier she put up began crumbling. Akatsu then took Lily back home, but just as he was about to leave to stop himself from diving into her honeypot, she held onto his trousers, begging him to stay. The thought of spending the night alone with Lily had Akatsu freaking out, but he stopped when he realized she was shaking. He understood that it was because of what happened, and since he didn't have anything better to do, he decided to stay. He parked his behind on the floor opposite Lily's bed, and as he watched her sleep like some creep, he replayed the fight in his head. He already knew the avatar going rogue was someone's doing and told himself that he shouldn't concern himself with heavenly matters. Still, he couldn't help but wish Lily would appreciate all the help he'd given her and repay him. Suddenly, he realized that he must have been possessed when he risked his life to help Lily fight her avatar. If he had simply ghosted her like your last girl did you, she could have died fighting her avatar, and he'd be a free demon again. However, something inside him wasn't all that happy with his train of thought, and that made him wonder if he'd somehow become one of the good guys. His moment of self-searching was soon disturbed by someone who suddenly appeared in the room. This person turned out to be an exact copy of Akatsu, and he struggled to figure out if he was tripping or if what he was seeing was true. The second Akatsu told him not to sweat the details and informed him that the reason he risked his sweet cheeks to save Lily was because he was hopelessly in love with her. Akatsu was shocked, but that didn't stop him from denying the allegations and telling his lookalike to take his delusional mind elsewhere. The second Akatsu told him not to lie to himself and reminded him that they were the same person, so it made sense that he knew his true feelings. He also advised him to embrace those feelings, saying he could have a chance at a relationship with Lily. According to him, Lila had begged him to stay with her because she felt vulnerable and wanted the person she liked to comfort her. This made Akatsu excited, and when her blanket moved, he hoped to get a glimpse of Lily's face. Surprisingly, what he saw was their homeroom teacher, and the next moment, the man got pulled under the covers for an intense clapping session. At the same time, in the real world, Lily woke up and went to shower because she didn't want to risk smelling like bad seafood in the morning. After her shower, she returned to her bedroom and was shocked to find Sleeping Beauty, Akatsu, sleeping in the corner of her room. In the process of trying to figure out why he was there, she suddenly recalled how she'd begged him to stay and get acquainted with her upper and lower lips. She felt so embarrassed and decided the best thing to do was erase Akatsu's memory. But before she could whack him across the head, she noticed his injured hand. Feelings of gratitude soon crept into her heart as she remembered he'd gotten that wound when he tried to save her, so she treated it. When she finished dressing the wound, she spoke to the still sleeping Akatsu, thanking him for being her knight in shining armor. When the sleeping boy made a sound, she was reminded of her promise to hug him for every job he did well and panicked. She couldn't believe she'd made such a promise when she knew she would struggle to go through with it. However, as an angel, she'd been taught to keep her word, and even though Akatsu was her enemy, she had to do it. When she approached him, it crossed her mind how weird it would be for her to hug a sleeping person, so she decided to think of a better way to reward him. Meanwhile, in a dream world, Akatsu was taking a class on seduction from the homeroom teacher, who was acting more sus than usual. He told Akatsu to put more emotion when asking his partner to rail him, and that was what he did. Surprisingly, the words slipped out of Akatsu's mouth in the real world, making Lily assume he wanted her to help his pickle grow. She scolded the sleeping fool for making such a cultured request, but didn't entirely toss the suggestion away. In the end, she settled for sitting between his open legs, because she knew that way it would be easy for him to slip in and out of her cave. After sitting there for a few seconds, she started feeling awkward and tried to abandon the mission. But before she could stand, Akatsu's arms wrapped around her.
Yeah, boy.
She was so shocked by the sudden hug but relaxed when she felt his body shaking against hers. She assumed it was his body's way of reacting to him, almost dying when they fought her avatar. Still, she couldn't help but feel a bit happy and content being hugged by him. Eventually, she moved out of his arms, and when she looked at him and saw his tattoos, she decided to make them less visible like she'd promised. The next moment, she felt a light breeze against her back, and when she turned towards the balcony door, she saw the glass was broken. On the door was a note from Akatsu apologizing for breaking the door and telling her that he couldn't fix it because his bank account was as barren as your hairline. This made her mad, and she swore she'd get revenge on him before jumping back into bed. The following day, Akatsu woke up to find that Lily had wrapped him like a burrito so he wouldn't sleepwalk his way into her magical folds. After he freed himself, he got up and walked out of the room to make breakfast, leaving Lily to continue sleeping. A little while later, she was woken up by a beeping sound, and she stepped out of her room. She was surprised to see Akatsu had made her breakfast. She asked if he intended to poison her, and he explained that he wanted to thank her for dressing his wound. After breakfast, the two left her apartment together, but instead of going in the direction of the school, Akatsu began walking home. When Lily asked why, he told her he was playing hooky for the first period as he wanted to take a shower. Before he left, she told him she'd fixed his tattoo problem, which made him happy. Just as he grabbed her hand to express his gratitude, Yuka and Hirota walked by, and the latter was shocked to see them together. Later in the day, Lila called Akatsu to the rooftop when he arrived and tearfully revealed that everyone now knew they had spent the night together. She explained that she'd gone after Yuka and Hirota after they saw them coming out of her building and holding hands. However, she didn't find them. Unfortunately, when she arrived at school, she sensed that things were about to get crazy. She tried to ignore their classmates, who were looking at her like she was a juicy piece of steak. But the moment she sat down, they flocked to her like sheep. Immediately, they began asking her more questions than a nosy paparazzo. Lily said she had been so traumatized that she escaped to the rooftop to get away from everyone and the questions. Akatsu asked how the rumor had spread, and she told him it was thanks to that idiot Hirota. He'd been so shocked to see the woman of his dreams coming out of her apartment with his friend that he turned into a mindless zombie and didn't even know he'd spilt the beans. Frustrated, Lily told Akatsu they had to do something to stop the rumors, but he didn't seem to care as he believed it wasn't that big of a deal. However, he had a change of mind when realized that this rumor would affect his mission as the girls wouldn't want to talk to him, and he'd never find a leader for hell. He was so scared of this happening that when he extended his hand to Lily to seal their partnership, it shook more than a leaf. Later, when Lily returned to class, their classmates surrounded her table again, and she did her best to spin the tale she and Akatsu had agreed upon. The students didn't want to believe her, and Yuka kept asking questions even though Lily swore there wasn't anything between her and Akatsu. Just then, her phone pinged, so she excused herself to get a drink, which made Yuka suspicious, and she was proved right when Akatsu coincidentally appeared at the door after Lily opened it. The students became excited, expecting Lily and Akatsu to interact like the lovers they believed they were, but that didn't happen. Instead, they had a casual conversation with smiles anyone with functioning eyes could tell was as fake as your girl's silicone peaches. After Lily ran off to get her drink, the students were prepared to sink their fangs into Akatsu and ask why he thought it wise to make a fool out of them. Before they could do so, a girl named Koyamatsu came to his defense. She gave them a breakdown of the analysis she did while observing Lily and Akatsu's earlier interaction. According to her, they maintained the proper space needed for friends to have and stated that if they had been faking their interactions, there would have been some awkward moments between them. Her second theory was that Akatsu got lost in Lily's apartment building and somehow became encased in stone. Yuka noted that Lily had shared the same story and expressed her disbelief. At that moment, Akatsu started shaking out his jacket, and to everyone's surprise, pieces of marble fell out of it. Yuka was still suspicious about the whole thing, but the other students believed the story even though it sounded more bizarre than JoJo's adventures. During lunch, Akatsu, Lily, Yuka, Hirota, and Tanigawa ate together with their tables pushed together. They discussed the events that occurred earlier, but Lily's spidey senses were on high alert. This was because she was sure Yuka was plotting something and she wasn't wrong. Yuka apologized for not believing their story and fed her a cherry tomato to make up for it. She also tried to feed one to the clueless Akatsu, after Lily refused to do it, which pissed Lily off. Yuka was happy with Lily's reaction because she believed it to be jealousy, and it was revealed that she devised this plan with Koyamatsu to force her friends to admit they were in a relationship. Lily was so angry but pretended like she wasn't, which freaked Yuka out because it reminded her of the clown prince himself. When everyone settled back down, Yuka observed Lily and Akatsu again and swore something was going on between them. She decided to test her theory and asked Akatsu to go out with her that weekend to see how jealous Lily would get. When the weekend arrived, Yuka took Akatsu to a store to buy a pair of glasses for herself, and while she showed him the one she picked out, they were unaware that they were being watched by an angry Lily, Tanigawa, and Hirota. When the duo left the store, Lily convinced Tanigawa and Hirota to accompany her on her stalking mission. For the rest of the day, they followed Yuka and Akatsu everywhere they went, and when they got to the park, Tanigawa advised Lily to be true to herself about her feelings. He then said he had somewhere to be and left her alone with Hirota, who rushed to the bathroom soon after. Alone, Lily sat on a bench and tried to convince herself that Tanigawa had been wrong about her feelings for Akatsu. Suddenly, she heard Yuka and Akatsu approaching, so she quickly jumped over the bush and fell into the pond she didn't know was there. Having no choice, she remained in the pond and listened to Yuka and Akatsu's conversation, since they occupied the bench she vacated. Yuka asked Akatsu what he found attractive about Lily, since she tricked him into confessing that he did. Akatsu contemplated his answer for a while, and then told her that he liked Lily's confidence, her ability to handle situations, and her kindness. His admissions made Lily's brain overheat, but it only made Yuka tease him about being a certified lover boy. She then asked Akatsu if he wished to date Lily, and he admitted that he did, but insisted it was something that could never happen. His words affected Lily deeply, so she snuck away without them noticing. The next moment, Hirota arrived with 2 drinks, and when Yuka and Akatsu saw him, Yuka asked who the second drink was for. Hirota replied that it was for Lily, and explained that he had been hanging out with her and Tanigawa. This prompted Yuka to start beating him up, because she was jealous he hung out with Lily and not her. Afterwards, she bid Akatsu farewell and dragged Hirota away using a leash. That night, Lily went to bed early as she developed a cold, but as she slept, her avatar emerged from her. The next day, word spread that Lily was sick and wouldn't attend classes that day, and that surprised Akatsu, as he'd always believed Lily would die before missing a class. Just then, her avatar showed up and took Lily's seat, shocking Akatsu. He became afraid thinking the avatar was there to finish him off, but he realized that wasn't the case when Yuka and Tanigawa arrived and began asking her questions. The avatar introduced herself to them as Lily's older sister Lilia, and said she'd come to school on Lily's behalf since she was sick. Just then, the teacher walked in, and when he saw Lilia, he asked who she was. Tanigawa then explained who she was and why she was there, but the man said she couldn't act as Lily's stand-in. Lilia insisted that he reconsider and assured him that he wouldn't even notice that she was in the room. How she said this triggered something in the teacher's mind, and before he knew it, he was flinching and trying to protect his head, and being a coward, he agreed to let her stay. Everyone except Akatsu was happy with this decision, as he was the only one who knew that behind those doubled bazookas lay a heart as cold as ice. Lilia told him she'd heard a lot about him from Lily, and said she hoped he'd continue helping her like he'd been doing. Akatsu considered this a threat of some sort, so while the class went on, he kept watching Lilia like a hawk. When he noticed she was struggling with her mechanical pencil, he laughed, but that made Lilia throw the lead of the pencil at him like a dart. He was so scared and pissed off when Lilia tried to act like what happened had been a mistake. Later during gym class, she attacked him again by spiking the volleyball so hard towards his direction and was sent flying across the court. However, during their lunch break, She met him outside and apologized for making his day miserable and for trying to ice him and Lily. Akatsu told her that what happened that day wasn't her fault and assured her that he'd already forgiven her for what happened. He then invited her to sit with him on the bench, and after she did, they talked about why she'd really come to school. Lilia admitted that she came because she was curious to find out why and what made Lily change since she started attending school. Surprised, Akatsu asked why she'd attacked him twice that day if she claimed she'd come to school out of curiosity. An annoyed Lilia replied that it was because he was to blame for Lily being sick, and explained that Lilia had gotten sick after observing his shameless flirting with Yuka from behind the scenes. Just then, Yuka popped out of nowhere and asked if she could go with them after school to pay Lily a visit at home. After school, the trio went to Lily's place, but when Akatsu noticed Lilia trying to sneak away to avoid being seen by Lili, who still didn't know she had gone out, he stopped her. Suddenly, the door swung open, and when Lily saw Lilia, she was shocked. However, she had to pretend like she wasn't because Yuka was there. She then let them into the house, and Lilia served everyone tea before she began telling them things about Lily, which left her feeling embarrassed. To stop Lilia from spilling more tea about her, she sent her to the store to buy a bathtub cleaner. As soon as Lilia left, Lily stepped out of the room to get more tea, and Yuka suggested to Akatsu that he check on her. Akatsu did as he was told and was surprised to find Lily about to pass out, so he quickly caught her in his arms. Lily reacted by moving and smacking his hand away when she remembered what he'd told Yuka about them not working out. Confused by her behavior, Akatsu asked if she was angry with him, but she didn't respond to the question and instead asked how his outing with Yuka had been. Akatsu admitted that he had a good time, which made Lily even more jealous, so she began physically pushing him away. However, since she was still very sick, she fainted, and the next time she opened her eyes, Yuka was sitting beside her bed. Yuka then told Lily she had to go home and said that Akatsu would stay with her until Lilia got back home before leaving. In the living room, Yuka warned Akatsu not to take advantage of Lily and then took her leave. Akatsu remained in the living room and tried to figure out what he'd done to make Lily so angry with him. Eventually, the dumbass figured out that Lily was acting that way because she had overheard his conversation with Yuka at the park. Suddenly, he heard a sound coming from Lily's room and remembered Yuka's warning about how it wasn't okay to leave Lily alone. This prompted him to go check on her, and that was when he discovered she was asleep and having a bad dream. He contemplated waking her up, but before he came to a decision, she grabbed his sleeve, opened her eyes, and asked why he was in her room. He explained that he came to check on her, and when she realized she was holding onto his sleeve like it was a lifeline, she let go of it. Her face soon began heating up from embarrassment, but Akatsu misunderstood it and assumed it was because her fever had returned. Lily screamed at him to stop touching her with his filthy hands, making him say he was glad she was back to being an annoying brat. He then told her he would sit in the living room until Lilia returned, but still stood there and informed her that Lilia had apologized to him for what happened in the past. Lily was surprised and then switched to bragging mode when he mentioned that Lilia was similar to her in many ways. Akatsu laughed and said that if all angels were like her, there wouldn't be a war between angels and demons. As he turned to leave, she called out to him and asked if he could hold her hand until she fell asleep again. Akatsu was taken aback by her request, but he agreed. However, when they held hands, Lilia walked in, causing them to separate. Surprisingly, Lilia asked Lily what they had been doing and explained that she had a warm and fuzzy feeling in her chest. Knowing that the feeling was a result of her feelings, Lily became so embarrassed that she screamed. A few days later, Lily was feeling better and decided to go demon hunting with Akatsu. However, they met the blonde-haired man on their way. Days before, on the day Lily defeated Lilia, a blonde-haired woman expressed her surprise to her companion that Lily defeated the snakes. She found it suspicious that an angel as weak as Lily had achieved that feat, so she ordered the blonde-haired man with her to find out why. Back in the present, Akatsu was surprised when he heard Lily call the handsome hunk of a man brother. He also panicked when the guy asked who he was because he thought his identity would be revealed. Thankfully, Lily spoke up and introduced him as her classmate from her new school. Her brother believed what she said and then introduced himself to Akatsu as Sui. After they shook hands, Sui told Akatsu that he would steal Lily away as they had some things to discuss as siblings. Akatsu said he didn't mind, and after bidding farewell to Lily, he went somewhere to gather his wits. He was grateful that Sui hadn't suspected he was a demon. However, he couldn't help but worry about Lily because he sensed she was uncomfortable with her brother's presence. He tried to convince himself that he was wrong and that Lily had only pretended because she didn't want him to discover she had a brother complex. But his gut told him that wasn't true, and since he knew Lily well, he knew something smelled fishy, and it wasn't him for a change. Elsewhere, Lily and Sui were in a park where Sui put up barriers so no one could interrupt them. While Sui stood tall and proud, Lily was on all fours, bowing before him like he was a god or something. In a condescending tone, Sui told Lily he hadn't expected her to have a friend, and Lily assured him that Akatsu was a clueless idiot. She then asked Sui why he visited, and in response, he stabbed the ground in front of her. He told her that it wasn't her place to speak unless spoken to, and said she was lucky the sword hadn't cut her face. Terrified of what might have happened, Lily apologized for stepping out of line, and Sui took away his sword. He then informed her that he was there on their sister's behalf, as she wanted to know how a pathetic weakling like her had defeated an avatar she blessed. Lily lied that she'd summoned the avatar out of curiosity, but when it attacked her, she fought it until she managed to remove the blessing. To sell her story, she showed him the cut she had on her right arm, which made Sui less suspicious. However, he asked why she'd only been exorcising beast-type demons instead of going after the humanoid ones. Lily didn't know how to respond to this, so he asked if it was because she was just being lazy, or because she was plotting something against them. Lily swore that she would never plot against her people, so Sui got up to leave but stopped at the last second. He told Lily that the blessing their sister had placed on the avatar was also a trap that would only activate if a demon had been close by. Lily was shocked by this revelation, and in the blink of an eye, Sui pushed her to the ground and held his sword over her. He said Lily had allied herself with the enemy, so he couldn't trust her anymore. Inside Lily, Lilia tried to break free and come to the aid of her mistress, but she couldn't because Lili had bound her in chains. Outside, Sui told Lily that she'd lose her life if she refused to disclose the identity of the demon that activated their sister's trap. Lili looked up at her brother in fear but refused to tell him what he wanted, as she secretly prayed for someone to rescue her. Unknown to her, Akatsu was on a nearby rooftop, so he witnessed everything Sui did to her, and it made him remember how cruel angels were. He sympathized with Lily, but talked himself out of rushing in and trying to save her because it had nothing to do with him. However, he couldn't ignore the fact that she was someone he cared about, and she needed him to put his big boy pants on and help her. This prompted him to call Liz, and when she picked up, he informed her that he'd encountered an angel. Liz instructed him to tuck tail and run for his life, but he said his mama didn't raise no coward, and then jumped over the railing. He landed between Sui and Lily, exposing his identity as a demon, so Sui attacked him, but he dodged in time. Sui wasn't that impressed, but he had already deduced that Akatsu was the demon who activated the trap inside Lilia. He promised Lily that she would be punished for allowing a worthless demon scum explore her secret dungeon. Just as he was about to attack Akatsu again, Lily bound Akatsu with her chains and begged him to stand down. She said she didn't want him to risk his life for her, but the stubborn idiot refused, saying he wanted to do it because he hated seeing her cry. This made Lily unchain him, and when he got up he said he would try to fight Sui without turning his lights off permanently. Lily told him not to be stupid, as he didn't stand a chance against Sui, because most of his power was still sealed. Akatsu scoffed, and after he partially transformed, impressed by the Akatsu's confidence, Sui told him that if he could land a hit on him, he would walk away and act like he'd never seen him before. Akatsu replied that he didn't need his freebie, however, he was willing to take it, and with that, the two charged at each other. Sui's movements were so fast and calculated that Akatsu barely avoided getting cut. He tried to retaliate with a kick, but Sui blocked it and pushed him back. Still, Akatsu tried to attack again, but Sui summoned his 4 avatars and had them hold him down for a group workout session. As Akatsu struggled against them, Sui called Lily to his side and asked how she got a demon to side with her. He said she couldn't have seduced him, because no one would want to make plot with a person whose body mirrored Frankenstein's. This statement caught Akatsu's attention, so he asked Sui what was talking about, and Sui ordered Lily to do a show and tell. Lily refused, so he cut her tights to expose her thighs. However, they looked completely normal, so he used his sword to cut off the false skin and reveal what was underneath it. Lily begged Akatsu not to look at her, but he didn't listen and even got pissed when Sui mocked her. Sui asked Akatsu why he was upset over what happened to a wingless angel, but Akatsu argued that Lily had wings. Sui didn't try to prove his point and just ordered Lily to show her wings, which she did. He laughed when he saw them and then told Akatsu he'd been deceived. The next moment, he slashed Lily's wings to reveal that they were her chains woven together to look like wings. Sui then showed Akatsu what an angel's wings really looked like and said Lily was nothing but a fake. As he kept belittling Lily, she said nothing and just sat on the ground crying. This intensified the anger Akatsu felt, causing him to lose control of himself and undergo another transformation. He then took his anger out on Sui's avatar and started by throwing one of them at the wall. The impact caused one of her arms to break, and when Sui turned around, he watched as Akatsu destroyed the other 3. Annoyed, he tried to cut Akatsu, but Akatsu caught the blade and showed Sui not to mess with him with just one punch. Just then, he sprouted some wings which surprised the siblings, but the most surprising part was when he zoomed past Lily to get to Sui. He then began throwing punch after punch at Sui, and as he did that, he laughed like an evil villain. When he didn't stop, Lily attempted to intervene and got slapped out of the way. However, she tried again. This time she used her chains and tried to talk some sense into him, but Akatsu was already past the point of reasoning. He broke free and tried to attack her, so Lily jumped out of the way to avoid getting hit, and while she was midair, she noticed Akatsu had only one wing left. This made her lose focus, and just as she was about to be hit by Akatsu, Sui saved her. Despite being the worst big brother on the planet, he scolded Lily for losing focus during a fight, and told her that if she wanted to save her friend, they had to get rid of his wings. He'd explained that Akatsu's wings stored most of his energy, and he'd used up one when he zoomed past her earlier. Sui then proposed that they work together, saying he'd get rid of 4 wings while Lily took care of the last one. When Akatsu moved to attack them, the siblings separated and used their chains to hold each of his arms. Akatsu broke free and moved to attack Lily, but Sui intervened by punching him. But Akatsu retaliated by grabbing Sui's hair and slamming his head into the ground. It was in that position that Sui opened his wings and used them to pierce through Akatsu's own. With the 4 of them gone, Akatsu's left eye returned to normal, and Sui called out to Lily to take care of the last one. Lily used her chains to create a body double and sent it after Akatsu, so while he fought it, she took the chance to get close and destroy the final wing. When he still didn't return to normal, she hugged him and begged him to come back to her, but she was too exhausted and fainted. Thankfully, Akatsu regained his senses and caught her before she hit the ground. He then approached Sui with Lily in his arms and told him never to come near Lily again or else he'd have to deal with him. Later, after Akatsu got home with Lily, he freaked out because she wouldn't wake up and he needed to take off her dirty clothes. He tried calling Lilia, hoping she'd come and help him, but she didn't respond to him. This left him at the mercy of his cultured mini-demon and angel, and they advised him to go ahead and take off her clothes. Fortunately, he was spared from doing this when he noticed Lilia had come out and was already carrying out the task, so he left. When she was done, she asked him to accompany her to the roof so they could talk without disturbing Lily. There she told him that she couldn't help Lily when Sui was mistreating her, because Lily had chained her inside her mind and refused to let her out. Curious, Akatsu asked her to explain what happened during the fight, because he barely remembered most of it. She replied that he'd gone crazy while fighting Sui, and seemed to enjoy every moment of it. Lilia then explained to him that throughout her life, Lilia had been mistreated because she wasn't very strong. To improve herself, she always did everything she could. However, she never stood up for herself when her siblings hurt her. Now, with Akatsu fighting Sui on her behalf, she had lost the only place she ever called home. As she spoke, she tackled him to the ground, and Akatsu was surprised to see that she was crying. She then thanked him for setting Lily free and defending her when all she could do was watch helplessly. Internally, Akatsu told himself he was glad Lilia was happy. However, he betrayed his kind by saving one angel and letting the other go free. He didn't think he deserved Lilia's gratitude, but knew that if he were placed in the same situation again, he'd do the same thing and save Lily. His extended silence made Lilia say that it was common knowledge for a guy to pat the head of a girl when she cries. Akatsu tried to avoid doing that, so Lilia asked if he'd like to pat something else. He knew she was messing with him, but decided that there was no harm in giving her a small pat on the head. As soon he did so, a camera flash went off and Lilia got off his body to check if the photo came out nicely. The confused Akatsu asked why she'd set up a camera, and she told him it was because she was gathering materials. He insisted on knowing what the materials were for, so she told him that she'd show Lily the picture if he ever stopped helping her. Unfazed, Akatsu pointed out that if she showed the picture to Lily, she would also get in trouble. So Lilia offered to allow him to cup a feel of her melons if he agreed to continue helping Lily. Akatsu refused, saying she was only trying to trick him so she could take another picture for Lily and cause him trouble. Later on, Lily woke up and was surprised to see that she was in a different outfit and lying in Akatsu's bed. Immediately, she assumed he'd been the one to change her clothes and tried to attack him, but Lily intervened. She explained that she was the one who changed her clothes. So Lily calmed down and sat down for some coffee with Akatsu. While sipping her coffee, she asked Akatsu what happened to her brother after she passed out. He explained that Sui had left without a fight after he warned him never to bother her again. Satisfied with the answer, Lily asked about Akatsu's winged demon form, and he admitted that he didn't know how it achieved such a transformation. With that said and done, Lily began wondering why Akatsu had brought her to his house instead of taking her back to her place. In the end, she concluded that he'd done it so he could get a taste of her spoils and even accused him of slipping something inside her coffee. Akutsu assured her that he wasn't that desperate to get his stick wet and explained that he'd brought her to his place because he didn't trust that her brother wouldn't send people after her. Lily didn't say anything after this as her mind wandered off again to the fight and how Akutsu changed forms. She also thought about what siding with him meant for her and if her superiors would pardon her, if she claimed she was working with Akutsu to learn more about his power. Her thoughts were soon cut short by Akutsu, who thanked her for bringing him back to his senses during the fight. He then told her to head home, but she told him she was going to spend the night because she didn't want to take chances. Akutsu was shocked and tried to refuse, but she didn't listen, and after a brief argument, she announced that she would take the bed. She then called Lilia and sent her to buy some items she needed. A little while later, Lilia returned with the things and bid them good night as she didn't want to intrude on their privacy. After she left, Lily went to take a shower and Akutsu took the chance to call Liz, but she didn't pick up. When Lily finished taking her shower, she and Akutsu got ready for bed separately, and after he fell asleep, she approached him. She thanked him for saving her life and admitted she'd been scared to lose him, so as a reward, she kissed him even though he was fast asleep. The next day, on their way to school, they ran into their friends, and even though Hirota was being a melodramatic diva, they decided to head to school together. Meanwhile, in another part of town, Sue called their elder sister and told her that Lily was still the same weak girl they sent to Earth and assured her that everything was fine. That brings us to the end of today's video. If you watched up to this point, let's confuse the fake anime watchers by commenting simp. Also, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. See you guys in the next video.